Alone Time is the 20th episode of the 4th season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Steve Zuckerman, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. A really solid episode of Everybody Loves Raymond, and interestingly, it's interesting to me, when I decided to start rewatching and reviewing episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond, which was about, I think, maybe 14 months ago, this episode was one that I remembered so well, and I hadn't seen the show properly in about a decade. So there's something about this episode that's really stuck with me over the years, and I'm not that surprised. It's a solid episode. Starts off with Ray in a pretty good mood. He barges into the bathroom. Debra's in there, but he'd forgotten deodorant. And Debra gives Ray a bit of a shock, because she has something above her upper lip. And it looks like she has a mustache. And I have to say there are a couple of quotes that I wrote down from Ray in this scene. He definitely didn't handle it well. He initially said to her, "Sorry, sir," because it looked like she had a mustache, and she explained to him she just has a bit of peach fuzz, she bleaches it, it's not a big deal, which to be fair, it absolutely isn't. And she starts to go off on how she's never alone. She never gets alone time. When Ray's at work, she's got the kids. She's never on her own. And Ray isn't really listening to this. And he said a couple of things that I have to say. They're funny, but they're definitely not things that you should say in the moment. He said to her, "I'm just picturing you tying some young girl to the railroad track," because of the mustache. And for some reason, villains tend to have mustaches. And also, look at the bright side, the mustache will distract me from the cellulite. He ran out the door after that point, which is fair enough. Definitely not things he should have said. But I did find them to be funny. And he agrees to give Debra some alone time. He takes the kids over the road, and Robert comes in from practicing his walking around the block. Obviously, this is his part of his recovery, his physical therapy, after being rammed by a bull in the butt. And he says how quickly it took him, and Frank says, "He beat your record, Marie." To which Marie replied, without missing a beat, "What am I rushing back to?" And they're talking about this for a little bit, and then Ray comes out with, "Debra has a mustache." And just the way he said it, it was so unexpected. I know I said I could remember this episode well, but a lot of the quotes I couldn't. And I didn't expect him to just come out with it like that. And the way Marie, Frank, and Robert just looked at him, confused, was entertaining in itself. But what's particularly interesting about this is that they're all acting like they don't know women can have facial hair. Some women naturally have a lot of facial hair. Some have facial hair in response to hormonal changes. They're acting like this is brand new information. And their response was, well, Marie asked if he meant if he meant she has a lover. I've never heard of somebody referring to a lover as their mustache, but I guess it could work as a code or a pet name. And obviously Ray explains the situation, and he wants to know what she's doing with her alone time. And he goes over, and I have to say, again, not something I recommend doing, but very funny. He watches her through the window. She's on the sofa crying, and that in itself was a funny sight. But when the mailman came up behind Ray, and he just looked at him as if to say, "What are you doing?" Very, very funny, very, very entertaining. And Ray wants to know why Debra's upset. Of course he does. He loves her. Why is she crying? So he goes over to try and ask her without asking her. He asks her if she maybe stubbed her toe. And he ends up, after talking with Robert, basically coming to the conclusion that she was crying because he's not the best husband he could be. And he drops hints at this and ends up revealing that he did see her crying. And needless to say, she was outraged. And I would be too if somebody had specifically given me alone time. If I had said to them, "I need this time by myself," the worst thing you can do is then spy on that person. That's absolutely horrendous. So while I often think Debra overreacts to situations, this is not one of those times. And she just explains that she was in the mood to cry. It's cathartic. And, well, she tried to make him cry by talking about his childhood dog and a few other things. And it doesn't work. And we end with a really fantastic scene where Ray is on the sofa with a box of tissues. He's trying to make himself cry. He goes to put on a sad song to see if that will work. And he just ends up doing a happy dance, which in itself is probably quite cathartic. Exercise is a great way to just shake off a lot of negative emotions because it does provide that endorphin hit. So maybe not cathartic in releasing negative emotions or any kind of emotions through crying, but definitely is in some other ways by just shaking out some of those heavier emotions by increasing the endorphins instead. So I guess one is about increasing mood rather than exercising a more sorrowful mood, but I think both could have the desired effect. And what works for Debra might not work for Ray, and I think that that's a good takeaway from this. Not everybody needs to make themselves cry to feel better, but it does work. And I'm sure many people will agree that if you watch a film and it's a sad film and you cry at it, it feels good in a way. Obviously, it's sad. That doesn't feel good, but there's something relieving about crying, and also something feeling good about exercising as well. So I think a good takeaway from this, not that every episode needs a strong takeaway, but I think it helps to show that if you want to cry, if it feels good to cry, do it. But also it's not going to work for everybody. And if you would feel better by getting up and dancing and boogieing the way Ray did, then that's good too. Really solid episode. As I said, it's one that I remembered very, very well for whatever reason. And ultimately, I can't fault it. Some great quotes, great narrative, great messages. Alone time is a really great episode of Everybody Loves Raymond.